Paul Cormier, President of Technology at Red Hat. And he also has the nickname, I call him Mr. RHEL. So Mr. Red Hat Enterprise Linux, because that's what he invented. So you have the pleasure to talk to Mr. Linux from Red Hat.
Thank you.
Paul.
Thank you. So we have set these bold goals here at Red Hat, and we did this from the beginning. So maybe we just start from the beginning, and in the first bold goal that we set for ourselves, it might not sound like anything right now, but 18 years ago, 17 years ago, it was a really big deal. Our bold goal was to make Linux the enterprise standard, the operating system in the enterprise to be the standard. So, back 18 years ago, when I joined the company, Red Hat Linux was strictly in retail stores. My first release of Red Hat Linux that I was responsible for, I'll never forget, we had to get out in October so we could get it on the shelves for Christmas. Our bold goal was to move that to the enterprise. There was some things standing in the way back then of why the enterprise wasn't really standardizing on Linux. It was fragmented, it was completely open source. That was the great thing of how it was developed, but it was fragmented. There were many distributions out there that weren't working together, and we wanted to create an industry standard for that. What did we do? The first thing we did was we actually stopped the retail version because we knew there'd be too much confusion, and we went to the Red Hat Enterprise Linux version, really, really tailored for the industry. Version 2.1 was the first one we did. We knew no one liked the version 1 of anything, and no one liked the .0 of anything. Hence, 2.1 was our first enterprise release. What did we do around that to really make it enterprise ready? We solved some of those problems that we listened to our customers. It was fragmented. We made it really a standard. There wasn't really an ecosystem around it because it was fragmented. Because it was fragmented, some ISVs were on one distribution, others were on another distribution, etc. We really standardized that ecosystem around it. We created a long life cycle around it. The thing that was wrong with Linux is a development methodology. I oftentimes say, we're not an open source company, we're an enterprise software company with an open source development model. What do enterprise software companies do with their products? They give long life cycles with their products so their customers, as they run them in production, they can really run them for a number of years. We put a 10-year life cycle on that. What it meant was, as the upstream community was off developing the next version, we were carrying an older version, fixing bugs, moving those fixes back upstream, keeping compatibility for the hardware, keeping compatibility for the applications over a 10-year period. That's what really enterprises needed. We essentially made Linux safe, secure, and performant for the enterprises. That's right now why RHEL runs most of the world's mission-critical applications out there while still taking advantage of that open source development model where so much innovation happens. We really are the data center standard of today. Today, RHEL is the enterprise data standard. Depending on what you look at, the number of market share we have out there, it's somewhere around 70% or so out there, but depending on the study. I actually saw an IDC research paper that said over $3 trillion of economic activity is driven by RHEL, which is pretty amazing. 90% of the airline systems in the world run on RHEL. 95% of all the commercial banks out there in the core banking and trading systems are run on RHEL. One of the things we did with RHEL when we started, the first customer base we went out to try to win was the banks, the Wall Street banks. We said, if we're going to do this, we're going to start in the hard places first. They're the most secure conscious, the most performant conscious, the most everything conscious when it comes to their trading systems. And that's what we tackled first out there. And I think that was really good for us because we worked really hard, and that's what made us really the standard that we are today. 95% of the Fortune 1000 companies run on RHEL today. So we hit that first bold goal. What's the foundation for the future? But Linux is that foundation for the future. You hear all these things around clouds and containers and big data and all these things. It's all built around Linux. The reason why all these things started up was because Linux became real out there. I mean, you know, when we first started out there with Linux, it really was a commodity play. I guess our marketing wasn't very good back then, but our marketing, we said we're 75% functional of what Unix does today, but we run across standard hardware. Well, we went way beyond that functionality with Linux. But because we now had such a powerful operating system out there, we really went from a commodity platform to the innovation platform. So literally all the innovation that you're seeing today in the infrastructure and in the development community is on Linux. It drives all the major clouds, including Microsoft's cloud. Think about that. Including Microsoft's cloud, it's driven by Linux. It's the foundation for the hybrid cloud that you hear about today. Containers, you hear everything about containers. You're going to hear a lot about containers from us. It's Linux. Containers are just Linux carved up in a different way. Any container vendor out there that's out there today needs to become a commercial Linux vendor. Kubernetes, it orchestrates containers which are Linux. Last time I counted, there are about 127 different versions and different companies out there doing Kubernetes. Each one of those is a commercial Linux distribution underneath. I tell our competitors all the time, we have a 15-year head start on that because we've been in this business. The last release that we announced in the summit last May was Red Hat Enterprise Linux 8, RHEL 8. It started 18 years ago with 2.1, with RHEL 2.1 that I talked about. In 2019, we shipped the first version of RHEL 8. Really, we built this for the hybrid cloud. The whole design point in the 4-year development cycle on RHEL 8 was around hybrid cloud. It was around performance, security, and especially operational consistency across all clouds, whether on-premise or the multiple public clouds out there. That's really important. That operational consistency for both the developer and the operations people is really important to our customer base. And of course, we built in performance, security on top of that as well. Manageability was really important across those clouds. We moved our Insights product into RHEL 8, within the box, in the box with RHEL 8. With Insights, we have many, many years, over 20 years of servicing Linux distributions. We took all that learning and used AI initially in our support group to help solve our customer problems more quickly. We moved that into RHEL 8 as a standard feature of RHEL 8. And of course, the security got even more work and better in RHEL 8 than it ever had been, as well as the performance. Let's move to our next bold goal. We started this hybrid cloud movement 7 or 8 years ago. So our second bold goal was make open hybrid cloud the default architecture for the enterprise. We get harder and harder in these bold goals as we go along. And then came clouds. Even before all these clouds were really getting mainstream out there, we saw it coming. We had that bold goal of hybrid. But over the last 10 years, private clouds have come on the scene and multiple public clouds have come on the scene. In the beginning of public clouds, many of the cloud providers, especially Amazon, was out telling people that every application was going to move to the cloud tomorrow. We knew that just wasn't practical, and that's why we built for a hybrid cloud world. Our customers told us that. Our customers told us they needed more than just to run their applications on one cloud. They wanted to go across clouds. They wanted a consistent environment on physical machines, virtual machines, their private clouds, and all the public clouds. They wanted to be out across public clouds, but they also needed to manage all that, manage across physical, virtual, private, and multiple public clouds as well. This has been our vision for open hybrid cloud for some time. We've built our entire architecture around this over the last 7 years. I've been, as Werner said, I've been at Red Hat about 18 and a half, almost 19 years. We've done 31 or so acquisitions of small software companies over those years. In the last 6 or 7 years, every acquisition we've done, every new product we've done has been in support of this hybrid cloud vision. Linux, our RHEL, is the foundation that gives that consistency across all of that. But our storage goes across all of that. Our developer tools go across all of that, and our management and automation go across all of that. Hybrid containers. Containers is really the first killer app for the public clouds and for cloud native development in general. Containers and microservices really provide that portability in that really structured way to build application software that can span multiple clouds. And it happened, again, because of Linux. Containers are Linux. Kubernetes came on board. We're the second largest contributor of Kubernetes in the upstream development community. It was a project, Google started the project and how they ran their development environment. Google came to us many years ago and asked us if we were interested in participating with them in this open source project called Kubernetes. We were in it from the very beginning, and it's why now we maintain typically the number 2 spot. It's us and Google at the number 1 and 2 spot for developing of Kubernetes. This all coupled together with RHEL, containers, Kubernetes, as well as RHEL for the foundation, is what makes up our product OpenShift, which now gives us the foundation for that layer across all of the public clouds, as well as your workloads on-premise. But of course, developers need tools and services now as we get into a hybrid environment. How developers develop their applications are completely changed now. So that means that the tools and services are completely changed right now. Our Red Hat runtimes out there are now one of the standards for developing applications, cloud-native applications. One of the things we're working on is Quarkus, which is really around containers, which is we really see as the next generation Java language out there. API management services that are needed out there for applications as they span these containers across multiple clouds. And of course, the development tool changes have to change, which we've brought out with things like Code Ready. So we've really put a lot of work in our development tools, libraries, runtimes, and even languages out there as we move out into this now cloud-native world. This is all happening in the upstream development community. The reason why this happens, the reason why this innovation goes so fast and so quick right now is twofold. It's because it's around Linux, and Linux is so available, and because it's open, and you get the best ideas that win, no matter where they come from. This could never have happened. Cloud could never, ever have happened at this pace without open source development in Linux. It's just too big of a problem. We've solved too big of problems for one company on their own to handle. Of course, management is now needed, and management is much needed in data across the hybrid world. As we go hybrid now, the whole management life cycle, the whole management scene changes now, because we're not just managing applications on one server that's out there. We're running applications that span multiple clouds. We start with containers. We run now applications that may span multiple microservices. Pieces of the applications may run in different places now. Management has to completely change. Everything we knew about management in the past has to change now. We need to manage clusters themselves of containers. We need to manage across clusters, and we need to manage across clusters across clouds. Very, very different. So all of these things change now with this hybrid cloud environment, all on top of Linux. What's our bold goal number 3? Extend your data center out to the hybrid edge. So one of the things we're seeing now, and you hear a lot about, is the edge. Computing is moving much more close to the source right now, because there's so much that's needed out at the source for computing. There's so much compute that's needed out there, you don't have time to move the data back to the data center. So really the success of the next generation cloud is going to be directly related to how well we all handle the edge. Move that workload out to the edge. Things of 5G. You're seeing the providers right now out there building their 5G networks on containers, starting to look at building their 5G networks on containers. They're going to move the container all the way out to the cell tower to manage that 5G workload, to manage the data on that. Connected car. When I talked at the summit last week, we have a customer that's actually analyzing the paint job on cars after they come off the assembly line looking for imperfections. The amount of AI and data that needs to be crunched in order to do that is enormous. Way too much to move all that back to the data center. I have to analyze that on the factory floor and make a decision on the factory floor and make changes based on that decision on the factory floor. That can only be done on the edge. Retail, out in the retail stores, bringing the cloud all the way out to the edge. That's why you're seeing even the cloud providers now starting to come out with on-premise platforms out there. But it really only solves it in one dimension. The edge is really the next thing that's going to really extend this hybrid cloud approach. And you need a hybrid cloud approach for this to really work. We're moving hybrid all the way out to the edge. Our goal is to provide the infrastructure, including the compute, the data, the management, the networking, all the way out to that edge, to bring that in as one seamless hybrid cloud that our customers can manage and make decisions on. This is what we do with OpenShift on top of RHEL, extended all the way out to the edge. Processing data at the source is really, really, that's important right now. We need to process it out at the source, whether that source is on the factory floor, in the retail store, or even in the car. That's the next generation of the cloud out there. That's the next generation of what we're calling hybrid cloud. And of course, our next bold goal that we're thinking about right now is bringing the edge and bringing the hybrid cloud all the way out. Manage the entire universe this way. This is how we're really extended of what we're doing out there now. So I'd like to call Werner back up, and we're going to walk you through on sort of how we think we get there and how we got there effectively.
Thank you, Paul.
Here you can go.
Paul talked a lot about now hybrid, and when I look at the market, what is a good data point to kind of where you realize that truly is reality? And for me, this data point is when you look at the hyperscalers, when you look at Amazon and Google, just picking on these two, believe me, they absolutely hate it. They absolutely hate it to come on-premise. Guess what they're doing right now? They're going on-premise. Why? Because the world is hybrid. So I think this is a data point which is so clear that this is a reality. Also a little bit to the bold goal of bring open source to the entire universe. It's not just about how you develop. I think open source methods of how open source communities work with principles like meritocracy. I think you're living this every single day in your organization, Paul. Paul tries to do something and his people say, no, that's a bad idea. We have a much better idea. So it's a classic discussion, best idea wins.
And they usually do, by the way.
And they usually do. To also apply these methods also to the generic organization, I think, which is quite interesting. But Paul, let me ask you a question. What do you think is the biggest pitfall or danger on this whole, let's say, in this whole cloud paradigm shift, and what do all these customers here watch out for?
The biggest pitfall, and that's what we've tried to address with hybrid cloud, is that we build silos out there.
You mean something like this?
You mean something like this. And so we've been here before with this, and that's the amazing thing about our industry. I'm pretty old, so I've seen a lot of things out there. When I tell my engineers, we've seen that before, they never believe me. But trust me on this, we've seen this before. Back here, all the vendors out there, they were building their own stacks, even in the Unix world. Even though Unix came from really only two places, they really built their own proprietary stacks, from the hardware to the operating systems to the middleware, all the way up to the applications, and they had silos out there. So we've seen this before.
So you mean, if you're not careful, this can happen?
It's the same. It's the same. It's the same. And that's what makes my job so easy, because we see these cycles before. I mean, look, I'm not saying anything about the cloud providers. They have brought a ton of innovation and continue to bring a ton of innovation. But I look at the cloud providers, and I'm sorry to our new friends at IBM, but I look at the cloud providers as mainframes. They are the mainframe of this generation, and because from the hardware all the way up to their services, they are a silo. In many cases, a very innovative silo, but nonetheless a silo.
Yeah, I think this is the key point we're also trying to get across, where you have to ask your question, do you want to live in this siloed world, okay, or is there a different world which maybe is better? So I think the question is, how can we leverage and utilize the fantastic services these cloud providers are providing without having the disadvantages of pretty much being locked in? So like for maybe some of you knowing the song Hotel California, you can check in, but you can kind of never leave. Okay? So I think that's a very interesting story. So that's why we were preaching always, Paul, like this architecture. Maybe again we want to reiterate, what this means.
I mean, if you look at this architecture from the bottom up, really Linux is the foundation of this. I know I say this too much probably, but it's just the truth. Linux is the foundation here. So we give that Linux foundation, that Linux fabric across with OpenShift, across all these different clouds with containers, so that our operations people and our applications development people don't have to work in different silos. That's the biggest thing. I mean, if you look at Linux even, there's different Linux distributions out there. Look at, for example, if you look at RHEL, if you look at SLES from SUSE, and if you look at Ubuntu. We all come from the same place. We all collaborate in the same community. But along the way, to make a product out of it, we make choices on what file systems we're going to package, what tools we're going to package, frankly, what packages we're going to package. So when you get to the end of the day, they're all open, but they're all different. And so that's it's different for the developers, different for the operations people. So now giving that common foundation so that your applications that are running on bare metal, and your applications that are running on virtual machines, and your applications that are running on your private clouds, and your applications that are running across the public clouds, they all have that common environment for the operations people, the security people, and the applications people. We've actually structured all our products this way as well. We've gone out and we've bought 2 different storage companies over the last 6 or 7 years. We didn't buy storage companies to compete with EMC and physical storage on premise. We bought storage companies to give the storage layer that same abstraction level layer that can cross physical, virtual machines, private clouds, and across all the public clouds. That's what our storage products are all about. That's what our development tools are all about. That's what our middleware is all about, as services on top of OpenShift to really span that layer. So we've built the entire portfolio and continue to build the entire portfolio, and now we really concentrate on even management across all of this.
Maybe interesting point here. 2 weeks ago I met with one of the large Swiss banks, which also they are an OpenShift customer, and they want to actually demonstrate. They asked me, they want to kind of demo at our next summit, because they're in real implementation, to demonstrate that they have OpenShift as the abstraction layer, and then want to demonstrate because they use OpenShift on top of the mainframe, so IBM mainframe. They use OpenShift on top of VMware on-premise. They use OpenShift on Azure as their first public cloud provider, and they will go to Amazon as their second public cloud provider. And they want to use Windows containers on top of OpenShift. This is as hybrid as it can get and as multi-cloud as it can get, including also Windows containers. And that's what, again, OpenShift as the abstraction layer gives you, to not think about this world, to think about the world this way by maintaining the advantages, the great services the cloud provider give you without the disadvantage of the siloed and lock-in effect. And give you maybe a data point. I think that's very interesting. When you look at this chart, and if you just look at the red line, you see that until 2016, the Linux as the platform for developer was kind of flat at 20%. And then you had a real inflection point. Means now in 2019, it's already way above 60%. So Paul, what's the reason for this inflection point?
I think containers. I think containers is that reason.
It is actually, that's when cloud native app development, which happened in containers, started. Okay, and as Paul said already, even Microsoft, Linux is the single most used platform on top of Microsoft's cloud. Who would ever guess this? I think that's just a gigantic endorsement and confirming pretty much also this study. So Paul, you talked a lot about innovation. Where truly is the innovation today happening?
The innovation is happening upstream, obviously, in open source and around Linux. I mean, that's why the innovation happened here. I said earlier, when I spoke earlier, that when we started with RHEL, it was about cost. It was about, it was about consolidation. It was about commoditization. But as it got out there, as Linux got out there and got very powerful, and it was available to anyone that wanted it, that's where the innovation started on it. And that's where the innovation is right now. I mean, we talk about all the time. We talk about the open source community. There is no open source community. There's 1 million+ projects out there. Each one has its own community. That's where the innovation, that's really where the innovation happens right now out there.
And I think a big push to this especially gave also the big Web 2.0 companies. When you look at Google and also look at Facebook, they don't monetize kind of the software as other software companies. They have a different monetization model, but they have tens of thousands of developers, and they all develop in these open source communities. So obviously these Web 2.0 companies gave also a big push, I think, to this innovation engine, like Kubernetes coming out of Google as one example.
Right.
So I think, so in this, when you look at Paul, how do we develop our products?
We use this innovation model. This is, I said it earlier, we're an enterprise software company with an open source development model. So here's the really important thing right here. We are completely 100% an open source development company. My engineers wouldn't let us do it any other way. That's the way it is. We couldn't do a proprietary line of code if we wanted to. It's just in our DNA to do everything open and upstream. We work on many of these projects up there. We choose some of the projects that we think are very, very important, things like the Linux kernel and Kubernetes, things like that. And we either hire the best or develop the best engineers from that. The way it works up here, the communities don't care which company you work for. In many cases, people up there don't even work for companies. They care about the best solution for any problem out there. So that's part of our strategy, is to ensure that we have those engineers. We then bring those projects out into a platform for the community out there. In the case of Fedora, for example, or RDO, for example, which is a community-based platform where community members have it beyond the project, but a platform to build upon. And then we bring those projects out into a product. For example, the product's either RHEL or OpenShift or OpenStack products. And with that, we build the ecosystem around that, we build the life cycle around that, we build the long life cycle around that, etc. So that's how we do it. But really important, you can't be a credible company that says you're doing open source development without having a very strong footprint in that appropriate upstream communities. And that's been a focus for us for a long time.
Yeah, and this always, before you see a Red Hat come out with a commercial product where we're saying we want to really sell it as a subscription. We don't do this if we are not having number 1, 2, or 3 position in the community. Because otherwise we would not be able to provide the enterprise support kind of which you expect as a customer. But also very important. Oh,
let me give another example. I mentioned earlier, we've acquired 31 companies since the time I've been here. We've bought companies with proprietary software and we've opened it up because we didn't feel that we or any one company could give enough innovation from just us for it. So we've made projects out of products even to really open up closed source software that we've bought for whatever reason to even expand the community.
I think that's also powerful and also very important to understand that everything we do is 100% open source, meaning the single only piece which belongs to us as Red Hat, the single only piece which belongs to us as Red Hat is the logo, which you see up there. The logo file in the product, the brand belongs to us. Everything else is 100% open source. As Paul said, the engineers, they probably would leave. There would be a riot if we would ask them, now you have to write proprietary code. So very clear again. It is all open. Only obviously the brand. The brand is ours, which is the Red Hat brand, and that belongs to us. So let me bring you back to our bold goal. You know, the last bold goal which Paul talked about is bring Red Hat and open source literally to the entire universe, okay? We need to have open source everywhere, not just on the edge, not just in the data center, not just in the hybrid open data centers, also bring it to life in your organization of the open source methods, okay, and how you're doing things. And I'm absolutely convinced that the only way to do this is to do it together and to do it the open source way. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you.
Take care.
Nice.